Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on sustainable commuting. I'm Susan Latham, the University Director, Account Director here at LiftShare, and I'm really excited to be chairing this webinar today. Last year, the Department for Transport's decarbonisation plan elevated the importance of decarbonising transport to reach our net zero goals. While emissions in other sectors have fallen, transport emissions are now the largest contributor to the UK's carbon footprint, and decarbonising the commute is one important element in all this. We all need to think about how we travel to work and how sustainable a mode it is. Last week, at a webinar I attended, I learnt 49% of the 15 million commuters in the UK are happy to share a lift to work rather than drive alone. An easy and impactful way to make car use so much more efficient, but less than 10% of these 15 million commuters are doing so right now. This isn't sustainable, and it just adds to the annual 18 billion tonnes of CO2 emissions generated by UK commuters. Mike Berners-Lee, in his book, How Bad Are Bananas?, said there are three fundamental facts we agree on. 1, we are in a climate emergency. 2, it is human-made. And 3, we can all do something about it. He then goes on to share his big win, which was swapping his solo car commute for cycling or lift sharing, something I can relate to. Our higher education institutions are a source of climate science and are critical in our race towards net zero emissions. With many decades of academic research, they have been at the forefront of tracking how the climate of our planet is changing and warning us of the repercussions of failing to act. They can lead by example, drawing on their research and expertise, maximising the commitment from both their student and staff communities, and they all have well publicised travel policies demonstrating their commitment to lead by example. So let me introduce you now to one of those leading by example, Tracy Cunningham, Environment and Sustainability Manager from the University of Dundee. Plus we have Stacey, a Senior Account Manager here at LiftShare, who manages many of our higher education clients. So before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. Please note the webinar will be recorded and then shared with you. Both Trudy and Stacey will take you through their experience on sustainable travel and will share their insights. We'll follow with a Q&A session, so please post your questions in the little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and let's leave the chat box for chatting, as we don't want to overlook any of your questions when we get to the Q&A part of the session. So let's get started. Trudy, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Susan. First of all, I am the Environment Sustainability Manager at Dundee University, but I'm also the Sustainable Transport Manager and Waste Manager and EV Manager, lots of managers, which gives you a different perspective. So whilst this is about sustainable transport, my starting point is parking, because I cannot go to my director and say, I want to take out more parking spaces to put in more bike shelters. That's just one example. So we have to come from it to make a business case based on the justification. Now, when I say business case, it's not all about money. It's also about, as you rightly say, carbon emissions. So it really is all about how do we manage our parking to get the best economic and environmental benefits for the universities. So this is where I'm coming from as somebody who manages various aspects. So next slide. Now, what's unusual in Scotland, Dundee's the EV capital. I don't know if you're aware of Scotland. Our local authority is the largest electric local authority in the UK. We were the first university in Scotland to put in rapid chargers. We've now got, I think, 36 fast chargers and 2 rapids and a handful of normal standard chargers. So it's not just about managing parking, it's about managing charging and bay blocking. So it's all related. I think that's the key thing here. So next slide, please. So it's not just about us, our fleet. So say we have 17 electric vehicles in our fleet now, but now we have lots of staff and visitors with electric vehicles. So we've had to join, a lot of our chargers are part of the Charge Place Scotland network. But what we've done for our staff, and I'll be honest, I do not know how long this is going to last, is if you have an electric vehicle, you can register with me and I register you with Charge Place Scotland and you get free charging. So we have over 100 staff who pay nothing for charging and they're allowed to park. Our parking permits, there's links for these things at the end of the presentation. Our parking permits, off the top of my head, are roughly £450 per annum, which is actually very cheap for a city centre campus. But you can park for up to 3 hours at a charger without a permit. So what we found was happening as well is when we didn't have enough chargers, people weren't moving because they said car parks were full. So they've had to stay at the charge point. And we call it bay blocking, charger bay blocking. So next slide, please. Again, this is just, as I say, I am, when I find spaces, this was where the old estates and buildings was. So I knew that we had the heavy duty cable to put in. The rapid chargers require their own cable into the main switchboard because it's 50 amps, so it packs quite a punch. Now we pulled down the old building and I knew they left cables. So this is just an example of parking and chargers and how you have to be on top of what's going on around your campus all the time. And as I say, you'll see later on, I am an opportunist and when I see an opportunity, I grab it. I will also say that most of our chargers were either 50 or 100% fully funded. Most of our vehicles, I've got at least 50% match funding, some I've got more. So we're quite lucky in that we've got lots of funding streams. So next slide. Now, here's an example. This caused quite a furore. Last year, because it was put on hold, it was meant to go in 2020, it was put in last year. This is the main street leading up to our Students' Union. It's in the heart of the campus. Campus screen is just down on your left. It was being used by minibuses for the sports unions. And I wanted to put in a street of chargers instead of 2 or 3 chargers here and there. And then people would complain because they had to move and they couldn't find spaces. So this is my solution, was I got funding. This is European funding actually, pre-Brexit. And I put in 12 chargers. Also, one of the chargers at the end, I put in extra wide bays, so it's suitable for disabled drivers. The other thing, I'm trying to remember what's on my next picture. If you go to the next picture, please. Next slide. What we did was, this is just, if you look in the left picture, that's the end of the 12 chargers. And then you literally go left at the bottom there, and we created a new car park called Electric Vehicles Only. And you have to have a permit as well. So people now, we couldn't find them when they were blocking bays for over 3 hours, because if the car parks were full, what are they meant to do? Now they cannot use that excuse because this car park is dedicated for electric vehicles only and you have to have a permit. We also have it set up now on all the chargers that it automatically charges you if you overstay by 3 hours or 1 hour on a rapid charger. So it's how things have evolved. Because we were one of the first to put these in, it's over 10 years ago now since we put in chargers. A lot of these things were not available and a lot of problems weren't there at the start because we only had 3 or 4 electric vans, maybe half a dozen staff had electric vehicles, whereas now I get requests virtually every week. The other thing I've had to deal with is, but it's not very environmental because we're using electricity. At the university, it is a gas-fired power station. We have our CHP, we generate our own power, and we operate we get climate change levy exemption because it's a good quality CHP, and we generate it just under half grid price. Within the next 5 years, we're switching over our whole 4.3 megawatt power station to probably ground source heat pumps. So the whole campus will be getting dug up over the next 5 to 10 years, which I'm sure is true for many campuses, because there's not capacity, you have to go big. And the pipework that's in place for our district heating system was put in 1967. And the pipe bore is much, much larger. So I'm sorry I'm digressing, but these are problems that particularly affect parking. I've already been told I'm going to lose some car parks in the next couple of years due to roadworks and civil works. So something again to be aware of. So can I have next slide, please? Now, the picture on the left, that's outside our main estates building, our reception. They are all pool vehicles. We have 2 BMW i3 cars, that's electric pool cars, and we also have I think it's a Nissan EV200 pool van and a Renault Kangoo pool van that any members of staff can borrow. You have to be a registered university driver. It's a straightforward form. They can register and borrow any time for free during university hours. So Nissan vans, for example, now have a range of about 120 miles. Within Scotland, you're never more than 50 miles from a rapid charger. A lot of people don't realise as well, they say, but what if I get to charger and it's not working? Well, that's why you look online on the app. It tells you what chargers are working and if somebody's using them. So lots of things didn't really happen again, but you'll see the picture on the right, that's those 12 charge points that I put in last summer that remained empty for most of last year. This picture was taken yesterday morning, I think it was. As you can see, now the reason it is so full is a condition of funding is 12 months free to the public. So a lot of people hadn't realised that these were free chargers, but once the word gets around, you do get a lot of people coming for 12 months. And then everybody has to pay apart from our staff. They are very popular, but equally in the evening, they are very useful because if all our fleet chargers are used, we can always park around there. I should say the dedicated fleet chargers, they're not open to the public and you have to have one of our cards so that you can't just have anybody plugging in, because we do need to recharge overnight as well when we have surplus energy. So next slide, please. Now, this is actually only just going away now. I don't know how many universities had this. We had testing in vaccination centres on our campuses. They took up large areas of car parks. And the initial lockdown, we allowed them to park for free in our car parks. But that established a dangerous precedent. When we started coming back to campus last year, we had all the local trades that were in the area, shopkeepers, were using the car park because word had gone round that we weren't enforcing parking. So that was a battle we had last September, was making sure that everybody knew you get a parking ticket. If you do not have a permit and you're a local trades, you will be fined. But equally, we'd lost lots of parking, so we were very worried about this. So, like many workplaces, we had hybrid working. Now, universities are different from most workplaces in that academics do not do hybrid working because, in effect, they already do that. That makes sense, because in the summer months, they go off and do research, they go on secondments, so they're not always there. They're seldom. Why would you need to be in an office when most of the students aren't there? So it really was about admin staff. So out of our 3,000 campus staff, about 900 staff were put on furlough. And they were also the ones that were brought back as hybrid. I was one of these people who was slowly brought back 1 day a week, then 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, only to discover that the person who was meant to be dealing with my emails hadn't dealt with them. So we had to go back, we've redone all the parking. There's a link at the end for our parking costs. We have now got very, as I say, serious about parking fines. And then I wanted to have just a look around. You go to the next slide. So this is again at night time. These are the problems we have in parking, and it's something that I think we should be looking at, is that in the evening, university car parks are quite empty. So we have introduced, if you go into the next slide, we have Ringo Pay and Park. So that means you can come and you can just park for 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever, and you can get a pay and park parking permit, which many staff have voted for now because of hybrid working. So this is where it's difficult to count parking numbers now, because we do not know exactly what days staff are coming in. We are not told. You may fill in a form saying, I try to work from home on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But the reality is you have to be flexible. So it means our parking is having to be flexible. The other thing, we've lost a lot of bays because of the new legislation coming in. I think it's next year. I don't know if it's UK-wide or just in Scotland, that car parking, you cannot have cars overhanging onto pavements. So we've had to realign some of our parking bays where the parking was adjacent to the pavement as opposed to in line with it. So we've lost quite a few parking bays. The other criticism we've had was short stay parking. There's nowhere, nobody could get parked. So we've done all this work while the staff weren't there. They've come back, we've done everything virtually they've asked for, because a lot of this I got back from travel surveys. So we've done all this. If you go into the next slide. Okay, this is our multi-storey car park with about roughly, I can't remember, 350 spaces. The picture on the left, if you look at the sign, it tells you that these are dedicated lift share bays for use before 10 AM. And it's to get people to start using lift share bays. As you can see, it is completely empty. That one car to the left is just out with the 10 bays are dedicated. Now, these used to be quite full because if you arrived after 8:30 in the morning, you couldn't get a parking space in. We've got about 900, I think, on campus, and you could go round in circles. So these were very popular. We had many couples who previously hadn't registered as lift share couples, and they did so that they could get a special parking permit with the little 2+ sign in the permit, and they worked. As you can see, there isn't the incentive. If you go into the next slide, that's taken from in the other direction. As I say, it's entitled Parking Today. Now, I do appreciate that term is more or less finished. It's just the end of the exams, but we do also have a degree show running at the moment and open days. Parking has not been an issue this year. I have not had a single complaint saying I went round in circles and I couldn't get parked. So we have to start thinking differently. So next slide, please. Right, sustainable transport. What is a perfect model is also if everybody can do active transport. That is not an option for everybody. So it's all about integrating your various options. So this slide is about, I'm sure there's various schemes throughout the UK. In Scotland, Cycling Scotland Run, you can be a cycle-friendly employer, which we are. You can be a cycle-friendly community, or we are also a cycle-friendly campus. And that's directed more at our students rather than our staff, which is the employers one. So there's links on there. There's Dundee Cycling. Dundee Cycling is a website for Dundee Cycling Forum, of which I'm on the committee for that. And it means we have an input. We also get an input on Dundee City Council cycling strategy, so we sit on that as well. We've got a new Dundee Cycle Hub down beside the V&A, which has got lockers, bike repair stands, you can hire bikes. We've also got the first electric bike hire scheme I think it's in the UK or certainly in Scotland. And they are dotted around the city. I've included a link for this as well, so I won't elaborate too much on these. We've also got an Electric Bike Scotland shop within the city that also has hire bikes. Within the university, I set up, I don't know, 12 years ago maybe, a bike pool for our staff. And recently, it's just read that Glasgow's an e-bike hire. Great, I didn't know about that. I'll try it next time I'm in Glasgow. This one's, as I say, it's expanding. It's been going for 4 years. 4 years. our bike pool originally was, I had a couple of electric bikes and a couple of normal bikes, and any staff could borrow them. But then I bought 10 new bikes in 2019 through the Energy Saving Trust scheme. And these have gone out to dedicated units because I discovered things, and you'll find this in every department, that IT had to run from campus out to 9 Mills Hospital to do something. And they were taking a van, and it was really just a man with a briefcase. So they asked if they could have an electric bike. And then we've got Life Sciences, who also have, they're based out at the James Hutton Institute, which is about 5 miles off campus. They were going backwards and forwards. I also discovered that there was a taxi run being done for the mail on some days if the mailroom couldn't get out. Somebody came in by taxi to pick up mail to take out. That's all been replaced by electric bikes. We've also got an electric cargo bike at our Botanic Gardens. Our parking attendant, Mac, he has an electric bike and he uses it throughout the year for going around all the car parks. It's the fastest and easiest way to get about. You can also, as I mentioned, book a pool van or car, all electric as well. So that's just a few of the things that we're slowly working through. Next slide, please. This is one of our, just give you some examples of things we've done. So we have secure parking for lots of staff, but not so much in the centre of campus for our students. So you'll see here it's a side view of Student Cycle Hub and interior view. All cycle shelters now on campus. I design and get them built by our local blacksmith, and it's marine pine with perspex. And the reason it's that is when it used to be all perspex, when it gets really cold, it actually cracks and can frost and break. It happened to 2 bike shelters that have been put in years ago. The other thing is, if you put in solid perspex, you get graffiti, and people tend to write on it. So far, I'll touch a big bit of wood. That's not happened. This has been in for, I think, 5 years now. Inside, I've also put in lockers, and just outside, there's a bike repair stand and an inner tube vending machine. So these are all things that help to make things easier for everyone. It's very popular with Deliveroo drivers, because if you get puncture in town, there wasn't any others at the time. There are now. There's now one down at Dundee Cycle Hub, down on Route 777. So the biggest problem though, and this is here's a sort of barrier, is the biggest thing I have with the bicycle pump is people keep stealing the nozzle. So I tried super gluing it in, so they just cut the bit off with super glue. So I go through about 3 nozzles a year, but as they're not too expensive, I just keep replacing them. So that's a barrier, I suppose. So next slide. Now, this is what I mean about opportunity shelters. You'll see in the middle picture, that's a space between 2 pillars and the overhang. The picture to the left of the motorbikes, there's an overhang there. So I put in a motorbike rack and a cycling rack, so it's sheltered and anyone can use it. This is actually the back of Dental Hospital. And then the next gap between 2 pillars was shorter, and I got the blacksmith to build me, as you can see, a cage, in effect, between the pillars. And that's a secure bike shelter. So the next slide has got our cycle parking regulations, because that's the other thing, is people like to look at them. They think they can use them as bike sheds, and they can leave a bike in there for a year, 2 years, and that's okay. It's not okay. So this again is some examples here. We've got the blue lockers. The green lockers are Warrior Triple Gold standard for security. They're for a cycling society. And you'll see the last 2 pictures here. It may not look like it because this building's just been done up, but this is actually underneath the stairs leading into the building. So the wall at the back of the shelter is actually where it's all concreted there. That's steps. And you've also got the steps going up over that L shape. So that's what I mean. You look for areas where it's quite easy to do parking. The issue I now have is, you'll see the numbers there, 58 lockers, 2246 secure spaces, residences, Sheffield stands. it's not enough. It's almost as though when we have less car parking and more secure parking for bikes, it keeps going up. We haven't mentioned also our cycle to work scheme. Our limit is at £3,000. People are aghast when I tell them that we have many staff that buy bikes at £2,000 and £3,000. I've seen them. It's because they go really fast and I want one, but no, I couldn't justify £3,000. But it's just to let you know that the appetite has changed. The other thing is we have more showers available. We also have the lift sharing. This bit I want to touch on that I feel like I personally haven't publicised. So if you go to the next slide, there's links for this. Is we also set up Bike Buddy and Taxi Buddy. Now, I have not really promoted this due to COVID and everything else, but I feel this is something that we should be making it more nationwide. The Bike Buddy, you know, I'm cycling in from this wee village on my own. Is there anyone else going my way? So that's where I feel it'd be useful to have help promoting Bike Buddy and the Taxi Buddy. I love this for our students particularly. You can both be standing in a taxi queue and you can even download the app on your phone. It doesn't take long. I did it on my phone. And you can book that you want a taxi going, you're in Dundee saying going to Perth, for example. If someone else does it at the same time, even while they're in the queue, you can then match with someone else from Dundee University. And that gives you security because you know it's another student or staff member. We also have it set up that you can link with the NHS Tayside, or you can link with the Greater Tran region, Tayside, Angus and Central. So there's lots of options there. So I feel this is one of the things we should be pushing, and also we need more surveys done to find out who's sharing on hybrid days. I mean, there's a topic in itself, because nobody has fixed days. Who is actually sharing on the hybrid days? Can we set up some sort of web page so that you can click that I do Tuesday, Thursdays, week 1 and 3 of the month? Or it's going to be quite complicated, and that's what I see my challenges with. And also lift sharing bays, I'm going to have to think about with electric chargers. So sorry if I've overrun a bit there, but I tried to cover as much as I could. So I'm sure there'll be some questions.
Thank you very much, Trudy. If it's okay, we do have a couple of questions that I'd quite like to pose to you now before we go on to Stacey, if that's all right. Is that okay, Trudy?
Yes, that's fine.
Lovely. Well, the first question is from one of our participants today who said, we're not able to provide free charging as it's a benefit in kind. Have you had an issue at all with this in terms of providing free charging?
No, we have not had a word about it.
Okay.
But I will say, right, this will be changing. We will be offering reduced charging. Part of the problem is because we have the pool cars, because they're always fully charged electric. So, okay. And then they can't claim their mileage charge back. Whereas if they use their own cars, they're claiming 45p a mile. They are not claiming back electric if they use their own car for business. So bear that in mind.
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. And then following on from that, it's, you know, how many staff or possibly a percentage of your staff are using the pool vehicles? Sorry, how many staff do the pool vehicles actually serve, and how well are they used?
Well, I have access to the calendar for the pool vehicles, and first of all, they're all used every day. The cars, not so much in the summer, I've noticed. But for example, the vans, we have a campus in Kirkcaldy. The library used to hire a van every morning to drive down with books and do the mail run. They now borrow our van, a pool van, for 2 hours every Monday to Friday in the morning. So we have a variety of things like this where vans are being hired. Our caterers as well, I switched to electric vans, and occasionally they're using an extra van. They were hiring a van. Now you can pre-book it in advance as well. We also have quite a lot of academics. If they have a meeting in Edinburgh, they'll actually email me saying, can we get to Edinburgh? Where are the chargers? So you just send them a link to ChargePlay Scotland. If you have any questions, first of all, it's all on the website. We had many problems at the start with people not charging or returning the car but not plugging it in. So the next person would go and it's not charged. that's a thing of the past now. It doesn't seem to happen anymore. So again, these things evolve. So
well done. And perhaps one more question before we go on to Stacey is, do you imagine the university will get to 100% EVs for students as well as staff and visitors? And if yes, what do you need to do to further accommodate this?
right, yes and no is the answer to that one.
Okay.
The only fleet vehicles we really have left to convert are the large vans, like Luton vans. And there are equivalents now out there, like so the large Renault Trafics and things and the large Mercedes vans. But I can't justify the cost. You know, we're going to use up the vans we have in effect. So that's an issue, is the funding for big vans, because there hasn't been any available at all. So that is an issue. And also, it's very much the better paid staff that have electric vehicles. I'm not daft, I realise this, and there's already been gripes made that why do they get free electric? So that is something, that's why we are looking at charging, although it will be reduced. What I would like to do is, if you live within 2 miles of campus, that you don't get a permit. I want to introduce, I've already got some discounts arranged on local buses. There's a car park we have off-site down beside the river, and it's about, I don't know, a mile and a half walk to campus. So I suggested we offer them half-price parking so they can walk that last mile and a half. But Dundee is one of the cities in Scotland that introduces low emission zone next year. So that alone will stop cars, I think, some cars coming. But where we have to watch is first thing in the morning is cleaning staff and security. They are some of the lowest paid staff. They're arriving at 5 o'clock in the morning. There are no buses, and I wouldn't expect them to walk or to cycle at that time in the morning to some of the areas they're coming from. So we have to be flexible, and we have to offer them, as I say, options. So that is my next challenge within the next few years, because we've like the whole, and the other thing is we have on our campus is we own most of the roads on our campus. So I can send you pictures where Campus Green is now. That was a car park 15 years ago. So most of the campus you can't drive on anyway, but we've had to still have some routes so we can get around ourselves. But there's virtually no routes around campus. Visitor parking, you have to apply for a pass. You can't just turn up and say, oh, such and such said I could park. That doesn't work. They also have to pay now. It used to be you got a parking permit for nothing, and it was being abused. I'm not sure about this one. It's just a new thing. So visitors have to pay, even if you're visiting an academic, or £5, because they tend to leave it all the time. So I've just seen comments coming up, sorry about adding walking and running buddies. I totally agree. So the buddy scheme, I think this is where we have to have legs in lift share, because it is all about expanding and also integrating. What about if people are going to park and rides? So we need to have bike hire set up park and rides. People should be lift sharing to park and rides. If they're quite happy to then get on a bus, why aren't they lift sharing to park and ride? Do we have dedicated lift sharing spaces at park and ride? Do they get priority? So these are just some areas. So the answer to the question is, yes, I could make it completely vehicle free by just closing all the roads, which I'd happily do. And we are closing more, so eventually it will more or less just be a ring road. It'll just be a ring road with some access points for deliveries. That would be it. That's the way we're heading. But I think it'll be quite a few years as well before we get rid of all the vehicles. So.
Totally fascinating, Trudy. Thank you very much. I'm just amazed at how much you're juggling in this whole journey. So thank you. Right, if we perhaps move on to Stacey now, and then we can come back to more questions right at the end. So Stacey, are you ready for me to hand over to you?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Lovely. Jackson, do you mind just popping the slide on? Thank you. And I guess before I get going, incredible work, Trudy. Just listening to you, I think it's fantastic in terms of the EV infrastructure that you've put in place. I love the cycle hub. I'm a keen cyclist, so if there's any inner tube vending machines in Norfolk, I'm all ears. That would be fantastic. And just before I get going in terms of what I'm going to be looking at, is just to touch on a couple of things that Trudy you've mentioned. and all for like the bike buddy example, just to make you aware that lift share actually can incorporate a walk and cycle buddy feature as well. So worth having a conversation with your account manager to discuss that opportunity. But also looking at the lift sharing to park and rides, or even localised hubs. It's something that NHS trusts are now working with us to do, even if it's a case of jumping on the bus or biking or walking to the workplace. Its wheels are in motion, and hopefully some of the things that I'm going to be showing you today will just highlight how we do that and support organisations like universities to do so. But thank you ever so much, Trudy, that was absolutely fantastic. So thank you for joining this afternoon. Just to give you a little bit of a background of what I'm going to be discussing with you is ultimately showing you how we support organisations to decarbonise the commutes. So very much kind of underpinning what Trudy said, but also exploring other avenues as well. So you may be asking why the urgent need for zero carbon commuting, not just kind of those operational challenges that you face as organisations, but really understanding the volume that the commute kind of emits within the emissions. So the commute is actually the single largest contributor to the transport emissions, emitting approximately 18 billion kilograms of CO2e per annum, making up about 5% of the total UK emissions, so a pretty hefty chunk. So in terms of what we've done as an organisation, and many of you may know us as LiftShare, we've actually formed a sister brand called Mobilityways. And this follows months of research and consultation with our clients, because we soon realised that organisations weren't focusing on the commutes, because there were a number of things that kind of came out. Firstly, there was no easy standardised way of calculating commuter emissions. Secondly, it's very difficult to affect behaviour change, predominantly more from actually getting them out of the single occupancy vehicle into other greener alternative modes. So how do they do that? They were struggling. And finally, is actually being able to identify the real world impact they were having. So being able to invest and put resource into more bike racks or cycle to work schemes or discounted rates on public transport is difficult for them to actually determine what was the return, both financially, but also actually on an emissions basis. So we kind of took that information away, and what we've done is, can you just pop onto the next slide, please, is we have created a number of tools to be able to support organisations to measure, reduce and report on those important Scope 3 commuter emissions, but to also overcome those operational challenges, which many universities, and much like what Trudy has outlined earlier on, is that they're expanding or developing campuses, which often means losing parking and a lot of disruption caused to both student and staff members. Other universities are having to future-proof campuses for workplace parking levies, clean air zones, ultra-low or low emission zones that are being introduced. And again, Trudy mentioned one's coming up in the next year. And just to touch on kind of the work that I did with the University of Bristol last summer, they've got a clean air zone coming in, and we did a great piece of analysis in terms of how many of their staff members are actually going to intersect the clean air zone and therefore are actually going to be hit with those charges of £9 a day. So it's being able to be proactive enough to be like, okay, X percentage of our staff is actually going to be affected. How can we help them with greener alternative modes that are still convenient and cheaper for them? Other things have come around, like the parking element, so reviewing parking to adapt to the new working patterns and to champion those greener initiatives like EV charge points and lift share, but ultimately looking at sustainable solutions to be the university of choice, both for students and also staff. Most students are looking now at actually the sustainability credentials of an organisation that they're going to work for. So universities are really kind of hot on it at the moment, as I'm sure you're all aware. So I'm going to talk you through the Mobilityways journey, and what you can see on your screens at the moment is ultimately just our kind of framework that we work towards, that measure, reduce and reporting. And each stage has certain tools that are attached to it. So in the measurement element to it, which is often the first part that we do, is we have the scoping smart mobility report, and that ultimately gives us the art of the possible. If everybody was to travel sustainably tomorrow, what would that look like? We then look at travel surveys and understanding what's currently happening, what are the behaviours and also the willingness to change, because that's key. We need to understand the potential, but also what is our captive audience of who can we really start to shift to other modes of travel. And a key output to the travel survey is the ACEL. Now, this is our standardised rating that we use to calculate, benchmark and track commuter emissions on an annual basis. And ACEL stands for the average commuter emissions level. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail for you. Once we've got that measurement piece and we've got all of the data insights, we then work with organisations to support them with engagement solutions and tools. And one of them being LiftShare, in terms of actually it's a piece of the jigsaw puzzle. It's not the solution, but it's a part of the solution, where with the technology of Mobilityways, we're able to create pending LiftShare accounts, which we've seen a huge increase in engagement and also maximising the conversion of people to actually car sharing, which is what we want. And especially in this kind of new working pattern, is really key that we match people straight away so that they know that they can actually do this particular sustainable travel. The next part is then using personal travel plans. And this is a fantastic tool to engage, inform and motivate your audience to try a different mode of transport. And we'll go into that in further detail in a moment. So we've done a lot of work there with an organisation. We've given them data insights. They've made changes, they've engaged their audience, and we now want to understand what that impact is. And this is all captivated on a Mobilityways dashboard. And when we then see a reduction in the average commuter emissions level on an annual basis, they then receive an ACEL certification just to evidence that reduction, but also to be able to publicise that on their channels as well. So without further ado, I'm going to give you a very brief demonstration of the platform for you so that you get a bit of a taste in terms of what the Mobilityways platform actually does. So when you have access to a Mobilityways platform, you import contacts into here, and this ultimately is your students and your staff members, and this helps you use the platform seamlessly and enables you to directly communicate to your audience and to be smarter in your approach to zero carbon commuting. So this will come into more evidential when I go through the actual platform for you. But the first step is to do the scoping analysis. Now you get a comprehensive report with this, but I'm going to show you the snazzy bit first. As you can see, it's a visualization and we have 3 maps here for you. So we've got public transport, LiftShare visual, and also an active travel. I'm going to stay on public transport for the time being. And what this is ultimately showing you is who has a viable public transport option and who doesn't, based on a double the drive time. So in the green, they have a public transport option that is within ×2 of their driving duration. Okay, so this is where we're saying, yes, okay, we could probably, if they're not using the public transport already via the travel survey, we can look to understand what is our opportunity here to get more bums on seats and what's going to happen, what's really going to make that happen. Is that kind of a subsidized ticket? Is it kind of a free taster week? But this is what gives you as an organization, I suppose it puts you in the driving seat, excuse the pun, to actually influence those conversations with the public transport providers, because they are actually listed in the scoping report. So you're able to kind of direct your conversations to the operator that holds the biggest market for you. Now, when we look at this in terms of what is this actually telling an organisation, well, first of all, it gives you value to your department because it puts you in the position to have a meaningful conversation to improve patronage to sites. So we have all of these ambers that are outside double the drive time. So it's the question to the public transport providers of what can you do here? is this a feasible business case for you to either tweak a service or even put a new service on? We've had success stories in the recent months with organisations working with their operators to improve just that. Other things is actually it highlights the growth opportunity to negotiate incentives to motivate your employees or your students to get onto the public transport. If you know from the travel survey that you've got 10% using public transport, but actually your opportunity that have a viable option is 20%, there's a conversation for you to then have. It's like, what are we going to do to get that 10%? What's the barriers? What can we overcome? And many universities have their own services. So this could also be a useful tool to actually adapt your own services to ensure that you also are providing a great service to your audience, but also potentially accessing underserved clusters. We've also more recently supported organisations in relocation projects. So we also know universities are potentially relocating some campuses, having a little bit of shift about. So it's actually understanding, well, how are my employees or students going to get to site and how are they going to access that, and what's the opportunities available? So we've also seen that as a real fantastic way of engaging the students and staff. So if we go into the lift share, the picture changes again. So what this is telling us is ultimately helping the organisation that we're working with the ability to understand the scope and potential of lift share. So we've kind of mentioned about the new way of working and making sure that the lift share bays that are available, for example, at the University of Dundee, are going to be used. Parking may not necessarily be the key driver right now, but sustainability definitely is, and the cost of living at this moment in time is going to be a key driver. So how can we really impact that and influence it? This scoping report will help universities to understand what actual potential is available. So if we look at the key here, we've got red that have at least 1 to 3 options available. We have the ambers that have at least or between 4 and 9 lift share options, but then we have greens that have 10 or more options available to them. And the factor that's taken into account here is that they have another postcode within a mile of that postcode as well. So they can easily walk to that location or they can get picked up. Now we do have dots on here that do not have a lift share option. Now what we're saying is they don't have a lift share option within the mile of their location, but what we do know is that our lift share system is intelligent enough to be able to pick up en route. So although they can't physically see on this map that they've got an option, but we do know that if their journey was available on the lift share scheme, that they would be able to pick up en route. So this data helps utilise or make informed decisions on number of lift share bays, the approach to lift share, the number of lift share parking permits that are available, but also to identify a target audience, if not everybody, to have a pending lift share account created for them. So we're using data from Mobilityways to aid impact. And this is the real key thing for Mobilityways. And I just want to touch on pool cars because Trudy did mention it in her presentation. Now we have a number of partners with Mobilityways to ultimately help with solutions. And one of those partners is pool cars. And what they really like to see from this visualization are clusters of locations where they potentially could sweat an asset out. Now, when I mean that, they could potentially locate a car club in the community to be used as a commuter vehicle. And once it's on site, it's then used for business purposes, and then it's used for the commute back out. So we're ultimately maximising that asset again, even further, by either potentially sharing it as a commute in, sharing it for business travel or for single use, and then back out for the commute back home. So this is where it really just helps broaden that kind of horizon and bringing on partners and potential solutions, being like, what can you do with this data? These are our challenges, what can you do? And lastly is the active travel options. Again, a completely different visualization for you. And what this is here to do and help organisations like universities is to identify the opportunity within active travel to compare against the actual. So very much like the example of 10% in public transport, if you had 5% active travelling, but you knew that you had 30% that could potentially actively travel, whether that's walking or cycling, you've got a huge growth opportunity there. So you have this business case to say we can increase our investment, we can increase our promotion, but more importantly, we can start to look at things that kind of disincentivize the single occupancy vehicle. And that often, like Trudy has alluded to, is based through parking. So if we can disincentivize the single occupancy vehicle coming onto site, and that potentially is actually looking at exclusion criteria, like if you live within 2 miles, you cannot get a permit. We work with a number of organisations that do that. And this is a fantastic business case to reassure the HR and the unions around those that do fall in with that catchment area do have an alternative option, and more than likely they have more than one. They more than likely have 4. And this is the data that will tell you that. Lastly, before I move on, and going back to Trudy's kind of, I need a business case for her director to then put more cycle racks on parking spaces. Trudy would be able to look at the opportunity within cycling to say, well, actually, I've got 20% that could cycle. And from the travel survey, we've got the reason why and how people would be encouraged. That's a strong business case to be like, this is the potential, but also we also know how much we can reduce our single occupancy vehicles, but we need to do X, Y, Z. So this just kind of backs that up as well. So hopefully this gives you a clear view of how the scoping analysis can kind of really give you an opportunity and being an opportunist like Trudy. So the next thing I want to show you is the surveys. I'm just going to take you to our Commuter Census survey that we've done, and it's got over 10,000 responses. But with regards to the travel survey, I just want to show you how easy it is. And from a university perspective, there's teams of all different sizes with regards to focusing on sustainability. So we know that there is quite a limited resource for administration. So we've got a tool that is really super easy to not only create surveys, but to access that data and results really quickly. And just to show you in terms of what it looks like, here it is. You'll be able to have the support of our team as well, just to make sure that response rates over time is what we need. But I just want to just show you it's pre-populated. And if you wanted further information around what the travel survey does and the tool itself, then you can ask for further information. But the key thing is the ASL, and the ASL is the main output of a travel survey. So we have in here, it's a really interesting story. So this is actually a client example. So they came to me, and this is a client up in Cheshire. They said, Stacey, we've got a 2030 target, but our key and our senior stakeholders want to reduce that by 5 years. So we need to look at the commutes because we've got a target of 2025. So this is based on a 2030 target, and we put their 2019 travel survey through the ASL calculator. And worryingly, their ASL came out at 904 kilograms of CO2e per commuter per annum, extortionately high. So when they've not even considered the commute emissions and they're looking to reduce, they really were like, oh my God, we've got a lot to do in such a short amount of time. So what we then did was, through the scoping analysis, we're able to understand what the opportunity is. And we put the opportunity in a simulated ASL to really understand where is the growth opportunity. And what you can see from this comparison is that they have 37% opportunity to grow their active travel. And they also have the ability to grow shared mobility and the potential to reduce their single occupancy vehicles. Now, when we put that back into an ASL, this is purely based on changing people's behaviour into active travel and maximising an asset, so increasing occupancy levels. This doesn't take into account EV or working from home. So this was a really strong story to share with their senior stakeholders, just to show them exactly what priorities they needed to focus on to be able to reach that 2025 target, which actually resulted in reevaluating their strategy and refocusing, which is what they needed and wanted. And that's just the power of what data can do for you from Mobilityways. And the last piece, and I'm kind of skipping lift share, but ultimately lift share kind of sits out on its own as a solution that we have. But we have the ability to engage using pending lift share accounts to maximize the engagement. But the last piece I really wanted to show you was the personal travel plans. And the personal travel plans is the end user part of Mobilityways. Once we've understood the data, organisations have either improved interventions, or they've put new solutions on, or they've increased their cycle to work scheme. We then want to be able to inform those individuals, and we want to do it smartly. So we want to be able to go to the specific target audiences, and that's when you put your contacts in, because you're then able to then filter based on who would be encouraged to cycle and send them personal travel plans heavily weighted towards cycling. Now I'm just going to show you the end user perspective. So I'm just going to show you a colleague's PTP result, so a personal travel plan result. And this is ultimately what your end user would see. It wouldn't show a driving option. Everybody knows how they can drive to site. This is where we start to shift people's mindset. It's hidden in the background, so if they wanted to see if they can go get there quicker, they can. But ultimately, we want to give them their recommended modes. And for Sarah, one of her recommended modes is cycling, because it's within a 6-mile distance and just under 30-minute travel time. If Sarah's never done this before, we'll give her a step-by-step process and her route details. But we'll also show her the journey elevation, the time it would take, the distance it would take. And if she's motivated by being more sustainable, we'll also tell her the impact of that mode, but also if she's looking at it from a health and well-being perspective, is how many calories that she would burn by doing that particular mode of transport. So that's what the end user would see. And just to touch on lift share again, is that this is the reinforcement of a lift share as a potential mode. And where we look at personal travel plans is actioning the actionable. So for example, Sarah receives her personal travel plan and she wasn't aware that she had lift share options available to her. When her personal travel plan she receives shows her that she has potentially 6 options, she has the ability to view those potential matches. And if she wished to action those, she could sign up to that lift share scheme if she's not already a member and message the individual or ask to share. And that's then how we then start to prompt and influence people's behaviour. And the last thing to really mention on the personal travel plans is the data insights that this captures. So the Mobilityways dashboard has your static data from your scoping, your travel survey and your ACEL. We then start to have continuous data coming into the dashboard via the personal travel plans. So as you can see from this view here, we have the ability to then capture what are the most generated options from a personal travel plan? What is the distance that your commuters are making, which then starts to give us an average that's realistic to the organisation. But also, when we do deliver personal travel plans, we have the ability to enable quick surveys to determine whether there's modal shift happened. So when a personal travel plan has been delivered, 2 weeks after, they get asked, have you changed the way that you travel? Yes or no? If yes, to which mode? And this is where it's captured on the graph here. If no, they get asked why, what was the barrier for change? And you then start to see all of the potential barriers as to why they haven't taken that mode on. Again, more data for you to then take on board to then, I guess, use proactively to then overcome those challenges. And then we do the cycle again and we'll look at those reductions as we go on. So that is Mobilityways in a nutshell, and this is how we're supporting organisations across the UK to decarbonise their commute, but also to overcome those obstacles too.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Stacey. That was great. So we're now going to look at some questions that have come in from our attendees. So Stacey and Trudy, could you both turn your cameras and your mics on? And I'll take a look at the questions so we can start to answer those. Have we still got you there, Trudy?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, fantastic. I just couldn't see you. That's lovely. Something that has come in, and I think it's relevant to both of you, is how would you incentivize a transient student population against a permanent staff and faculty members to try new modes of transport, sustainable commuting? Any top tips you can share with the audience?
I'll give you one example. Buses, for example. I I bend arms and get a number of free travel passes for buses, so that during Freshers Week, I personally don't do it, but we have student services and teams. So, for example, they'll take them on the bus out to the beach at Broughty Ferry. They'll take them on the bus to our Botanic Gardens, and it's to show the students that we actually don't encourage students to bring cars to campus. We tell them you don't need one because Dundee's only 5 miles by 2 miles roughly, and it's got a really good bus service with live times on the bus stops. So we tell them not. There's very, very few students bring cars, I'll be honest, and because the parking charge, you can't park at 4 out of 5 halls of residence. We offer no parking for students. They're only allowed to park on campus in the evenings, and then even then they have to pay, because you do not need a car. We tell them do not bring one. And I've got a discount with our staff on buses now, because this is the other thing, badger people. I spoke to Stagecoach, so our staff get 10% discount on their weekly bus ticket if you use their code. So I met with Explore Dundee last week and said, by the way, your competitor is giving me 10% discount. So he's a way to go and look into it, because I've been trying to get discount out of them for years, and I just thought, right, I'm just going to tell it straight that I'm not promoting their stuff, because Stagecoach give me lots of stuff. So he's coming back, and hopefully he says he should be able to come back with some free tickets. And I also suggested, they have an electric bus they're just trialling. So I said, can we not do a magical mystery tour for our students, and you pick them up on this electric bus and show them around Dundee? So I think that'd be good, but there is an examples incentives now. So for our staff, we've got more staff using buses. I'll be quite honest, the biggest incentive is the cost of petrol and diesel. The same with lift sharing. That's cost comes into it, and we do have more staff that are climate aware. I think that's be true to say. Students have always been more climate aware, but now we've got lots of staff suddenly saying it's not enough that I recycle at home, because a lot of people thought that was enough. I'm a good citizen at home, but I can throw it in any bin at work. So
fantastic. I definitely want you on my team and negotiating at some point, Trudy.
I was going to say, get yourself a Trudy is the top tip.
Yeah, absolutely. Any
job offers open.
And Stacey, any top tips from you in terms of incentivizing people to look at different modes?
I think in terms of when we're looking at behaviour change, really when we're supporting organisations, is what's in it for them. We're looking at convenience, we've got to look at cost. We've also got to look at actually the variety that's available to them. So Trudy's kind of listing off all of the options available, which is fantastic. And I know the universities are doing similar, but it's then actually informing them and just giving them the direct information and clear kind of actions as to this is why you do it, here's what's available. And it does come down to kind of how are you incentivizing them? What's really the key reason why they would do that? And it often does come down to that convenience and that cost element to it. But yeah, ultimately, and the key thing for us is we understand that through understanding what their behaviours are and how they'd be encouraged through a travel survey. So we're kind of not like pointing in our fingers in the air. It's very much based on what is our audience telling us to then be able to support the organisation with recommendations of this is what we think that should and would motivate for behaviour change.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And then we've got a question which is there any intention to reduce car parking numbers at the University of Dundee further to support other modes of travel?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's actually happening naturally. So, for example, we've got a new plant room being built over summer. You know, this is just one example. We're spending 30 million per annum for the next 5 years on campus. So a lot of building work. I'm a part of T-City Steel. So we're putting in a new plant room. They're taking away parking spaces for it, right? So instead of them putting in more parking spaces, I'm putting in a new bike shelter. So that's straight away. And whenever we put up new buildings, you'll have heard of BREEAM, the environmental assessment model for buildings. Mm-hmm. Well, you have to have a bike rack within, is it 50 metres of that front door? So I've actually not got BREEAM points because you couldn't see the door of the shelter from the front door of a building. That's how strict it is. So within the university sector, it's a condition of funding, certainly, that we have to have a BREEAM very good for major refits. And if it's a new building, it has to be excellent. So it has to have bus links, it has to have bike parking. So these accreditations are normal for universities. So it's same for public sector. You have to have BREEAM standards to get funding. It is a condition of funding. So that's another big thing, is it's the legislation and conditions of funding that make people do a lot of things. For example, I would never have put in so many chargers if I hadn't wangled lots of free ones.
Again, I want my team to negotiate. And following on from that, then, Trudy, are there do you have a calculation, or do you have a rule of thumb in terms of calculating the number of lift share bays that you would keep within your car parking estate?
Well, I had to fight. Originally, we had 20, but it got reduced to 10 because only about 10 were in use, because the other 10 were in another car park, and it was one of the furthest away car parks, and people obviously viewed that as a step too far. So you learn. It's got to be in a hot spot. If you're going to have lift share ones, it's got to be in a hot parking zone. I would like to put in the automatic number plate recognition. That would be the next thing. As I say, we're putting up buildings, and instead of putting back parking, I'm putting in bike shelters. So I've actually got one on order at the moment and another one in the pipeline. So within the next 3 months, I'll have parking for another 40 bikes instead of another 4 cars. So, and I do audits, sorry, I forgot. I get a parking attendant, he loves me to bits. I give him a spreadsheet of all our parking spaces, I think there's about 900. And he has to go and do an audit in one morning. He has to go around them all and tell me how many people are parked and in which car parks. So I haven't done one since COVID, so I better go and upset him soon.
Fantastic. And Stacey, have you got anything to add with that in terms of, how would people calculate the number of lift share bays that they should be considering if they're looking at changing how they organise their car parks and possibly consider a lift share solution?
There's lots of different approaches that we've seen from kind of our variety of clients that we've worked with, and they kind of vary from actually let's understand what the demand is and supply the demand, and that's through kind of how we launch with lift share. So people sign up, they get themselves into a lift share team and ultimately secure themselves a priority parking space, and that's done in that way. So we've done that before with a client where they've then actually allocated 50 lift share bays, and they've been able to do that within a matter of a couple of months launching, saving, I think it's about £30,000 and accumulatively to employee costs, which is fantastic for an organisation to be able to shout about. But we also then look at the other spectrum of, if it's a real parking problem that an organisation has, or they're losing 200 spaces, the simple answer to that is we then need to park 200 people, but in kind of optimizing the assets that we already have, so parking spaces. So actually it's putting those 200 people in potentially 100 lift share spaces. So it's being able to understand how much we're going to lose versus then how do we then utilize and maximize what we already have available. Very much like what Trudy's done with her spaces. And it's amazing being able to visualize certain spaces and adapting that to be bike lockers, very much the same context with car parking spaces. Is you're going to be losing 200, therefore 200 people cannot park anymore. You then have to put those 200 people in more spaces, and that ultimately is then going to determine how many lift share bays or priority bays you put into place. So those are just a couple of options, but again, it really is down to what does the organisation want and also need to achieve, and it's then working out a suitable approach based on that.
Lovely, thank you very much. The next question is targeted at Trudy, and it's, what do you think your carbon savings have been as a result of all of these initiatives? And if actually, I could probably kick that off if you wanted, Trudy, because I did a little bit of research on the University of Dundee before coming on the call today. And I found out that the lift share scheme at the university has saved 441 tonnes of CO2, and over 2 million miles have been removed as a result of your lift sharers doing what they're doing, which is equated to a pound saving of over £526,000, which isn't bad, is it? But I'm sure it's far more than that because of all of the other schemes that you're doing.
I haven't pulled it up just now, but within Scotland, we all have to do our climate change reports. They're in the public domain, and you can look up my fleet miles, you can look up my air miles. When I say my, it's the university, but I do all the figures. Fleet miles, air miles, and also the grey miles. Now, the grey miles are coming down. Why? Because staff are using pool cars more, and you never used to log the grey miles if it was electric, but this year's reporting that just went in November, it does log the electric miles now as well. It's a tiny, tiny amount of carbon, but at least it's been logged now. So yes, our grey miles are going down, our air miles are going down, and our parking permits were just issued this month. So in a couple of weeks, I will get the figures of parking permits issued. So I do know they are down, which I know that's not music to most people's ears, but it is to me. So yeah, but then I've been looking around the city. This is the other thing. Do comparisons. We're still really, really cheap. If you look at the Dundee City Council car parks close by and the shopping centres, for £450 for 12 months parking in the heart of the city is a bargain, is my view on it. And I know lots of people do not agree with me, but a lot of them now are not buying the year's tickets. And I want to get, that's my big challenge is in Dundee. It's not like Edinburgh, Glasgow, where you see lots of professionals using buses. It doesn't happen in Dundee. It's really rare to see somebody in a suit on a bus. So I want to change that somehow. I want to change that attitude. And to get more people walking, I'm going to be buying a whole pile of umbrellas yet. My boss doesn't know it though.
Fantastic.
You know, so you've got to have incentives, but at the end of the day, there's some people I know I can never win round. So the only way to do it is to enforce it by changing policies. So if I change a policy that if you live under 2 or 3 miles, you cannot park on campus. That's the end of the story. I'm hoping to get that one in quite soon. And then, really, as a wish, if in your employment contract, it actually says you must live within 20 miles of campus. That end of story. So we have academics that live in Edinburgh, in Glasgow, and the same for all universities. They don't always move when they move to another institution. Mm-hmm. We have staff that live in Dunkeld, Aberfeldy, Pitlochry, Perth. They come from all over. A third of our staff live in Fife. That's where I live. So we need to start looking into, people shouldn't be travelling 50 miles to work. I'm sorry, it's not viable anymore. So again, wouldn't that be great if we could all get that into employment contracts? Maybe that's a challenge for next year.
Yeah, quite a challenge for your HR team as well, but good luck with that one. And then I've also got another question that says, is there a specific permit for EVs? And are there any criteria staff have to meet to prevent people living very, very short distances and bringing their cars in, regardless of the EV fuel type?
Currently, no, because we're reviewing everything at the moment. Unfortunately, I'd literally just done a survey January 2019. a 30-page travel survey with comprehensive data to write a new travel plan. And I more or less have ripped it up because now I'm doing a new one. I'm working with Travel Know-How and with Tatran, and I've just launched a new travel survey because everything has changed. Absolutely everything has changed. So at the moment, no. I think we just have to wait and see how it's going to play out, I'll be quite honest. And I think, as I said before, petrol and diesel costs, people want to work from home, but more so in the summer. Why? Because you don't have to heat your office at home. I've had a few people complaining about that, in that they're coming to work because they can at least get hot, because they can't afford it. And it's the same with students. Lots of students will come back, and some of it is for heat. You know, so we have to factor this in that it's going to be completely different in September. It's not going to be like, I don't think anyway, I will have my usual green travel day and things. And I used to always tell the students as well that you can register with LiftShare just for one-off journeys. This is another thing I'm trying to push. So I send out emails at Christmas saying things like, get me home for Christmas. And it's explaining to them that they can LiftShare. There might be someone else who lives in the same county as them or the same country, and they can share together. So it's all about knowing your market, I suppose. I can't win them all.
And that's a really good point, Trudy, because that was how LiftShare came into being. Ali, our founder, was at Bristol University, wanted to come home one weekend, didn't have enough money, put a notice on the student board. He did get a lift back to Norfolk, graduated, and being the analytical, data-driven chap that he is, kept thinking, I think this has got legs. He launched LiftShare 23 years down the line. Here we are. So yeah, I must tell him that story in case he's missed this section of the webinar. So thank you. I've got another question for both of you, actually.
Sorry, Sue, just before you move on, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the permit element. Within regards to what we're doing with the NHS trusts at the moment, is what we're working with the permit systems to embed personal travel plans. So it's trying to sow the seed of what their potential options are before they apply for a permit. And in some cases, some NHS trusts are adding in criterias, which if you have 2 or 3 or more options available to you that's sustainable and you don't meet any of the other criteria, you won't get a permit. So we are also using that as a tool to support permit application processes as well. So if you want more information, feel free to kind of pick my brains on that one. I'm more than happy to share insights of what we're doing with the NHS trusts at the moment too.
Yeah, well, I might pick your brains on that one, Stacey, because that's
Go for it, Trudy. It's a really interesting project.
Yeah, we're looking to introduce that potentially. Is under 2 miles you don't get a permit, and also you have to have permits even for EVs, although you can charge without permit, but you must move after 3 or 1 hour.
Yeah.
Otherwise you get charged.
Right.
Yeah.
Give us a shout after this. Happy to help you there.
Yeah, yeah. As I say, I'm rewriting a travel plan, so this
Fantastic.
is my fourth 5-year travel plan I've written, I think.
Wow. This is a question for both of you. Somebody's asked, can you LiftShare across organisations, i.e. for people working in multi-organisation business parks or next door to each other in city centres? So if you'd like to take that one first, Trudy.
Well, it's quite funny because I encountered this about 5 years ago, and because we own, when I say we own, we pay 20% bills roughly of 9 Mills Hospital. We also have a dental hospital and school on campus. So many of our staff are NHS Tayside and Dundee University, but they couldn't share. Okay, so we've now got, I think, 4 different groups we have in Scotland. So we have Dundee University. Then you can also choose to link with NHS Tayside. Then you can choose to link with the Tatran area. And then we also set up a group for universities in Scotland. So we have many universities, somebody's in Edinburgh coming to Dundee and vice versa. So the Scottish universities all speak to each other and share. So I view it as an onion. There's layers and layers of onion, depending on how far you want to go. So, but that was the thing that came out of a travel topic support network meeting about 5 years ago. So I remember working with LiftShare and we set up these super groups. So yes, work with LiftShare and they'll set you up a super group. That's all I can say.
Lovely, thank you. And Stacey, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add there. Trudy's absolutely nailed that question.
That was perfect. Okay, I think we've got just under 10 minutes left. So let's do one more question. So I've got, have you got any tips of effective or strong arguments for influencing senior management? Oh, I love this. Like the University of Dundee, we have stumbling blocks getting some ideas or projects past senior management who are resistant to the removal of car parking.
Can I take that one first?
Yeah,
and Trudy can give like a real life example of how she kind of works internally, and I can just speak from experience with I suppose the client that I kind of used as an example up in Cheshire. It was ultimately showing them the data and the potential within that ACEL target of this is where you currently are, this is what you're wanting to achieve. And that could be based on emissions, or it could also be based on the operational challenges that are potentially coming up in the future of this is what we need to do. Now we can then provide real kind of hardcore data based on that. And that ultimately led for your knowledge, Jennifer, is being able to, for us to be working with that organisation with a senior stakeholder workshop and just showing them and giving them insights around what we potentially can do, but also giving them clear case studies around what has been achieved elsewhere based on those particular circumstances. So we ultimately come at it from a very data-driven perspective, but it's also backed by a lot of successful stories that we've worked with clients across the UK for a number of years as well. So that's where we support organisations to influence senior management. But I'm sure, Trudy, you will have actually more of what it's like as the person that's trying to influence. So I'll hand that over to you now.
Okay, very, very difficult, but in Scotland, we've got new laws. Yay. From this year, so this year's reporting, climate change report, all Scottish public bodies have to declare when their net zero target is. Okay, we have to have a net zero plan. We're working on it right now. Edinburgh's already got theirs, Glasgow, St Andrews, lots of the universities in Scotland. So we must have a net zero plan and we must show how we can get there by 2045. The other thing is we have to, so part of my remit is to reduce, because we have to start including, I think it's next year, the commute for all staff and students. That will be our largest emission source with procurement, which is going to be added to. So forget energy, forget waste, all these things we're dealing with now, but the commute will be part of our carbon footprint and we will be penalised within the next few years. So we're all running around daft in Scotland, and I know I shouldn't say this, but we're all going to have to offset. We have increasing international students. We will have, I can't manage how someone flies from China, for example, or Africa or America, or so, and we have to count that in our footprint. The commute will be counted for staff and students. So worrying times again for transport managers in HE and FE. So yeah, in a couple of years' time, we'll all be really, really worried, and I'll be even grayer. So
brilliant.
That's something to look forward to.
Thank you very much. I think we've got about 5 minutes left, so I wondered if you would both just like to make a closing statement on sustainable commuting.
Yeah, my main thing is it has to be integrated. I do not own a car. I've spent my life relying on friends and my legs and a bike and public transport. I'm shocked by what's happening in Scotland with the rail networks. I can't get home from Edinburgh after 7 o'clock at night on the train. But integrated, there's actually consultations. This is the other thing, tell everybody, there's consultations all the time. I've just done one for Tayside and North East Fife, a bus consultation to the public. People moan about buses, fill in a consultation. That's my biggest tip, is fill in consultations if you want change. And the other thing is LiftShare has to get bigger because it saves so much money. That's the main reason I used to get more people to convert. Was I used to send out emails just after budgets. As soon as I put the petrol price in budgets, I'd send out an email saying, this trip's costing you an extra £5 a week. That's how we get them, is through the wallets. So I don't know if that's a tip or not, because it's a bit mean, but that's the biggest driver.
Absolutely love it. And then Stacey, have you got a closing statement you'd like to make on sustainable commuting?
I just think we've got a huge task on our hands with limited time. So it's kind of, we need to act now. We need to understand where we're currently at and how far we've got to go. And very much like today's session is, you have to network, you have to pull together, and you have to ultimately ask the question of what can we do better. And I think with kind of the data insights in there, the experts that are out there, and ultimately the people that are on the ground that know their area the best, is really kind of leaning on that intel to really drive change. I think it's totally possible. And it's just a case of we just have to crack on straight away. We're here to support. You've got your network of universities to support as well, and we need to make it happen. We need to make zero carbon commuting a reality really quickly.
Brilliant. So to wrap up, I would just like to say an enormous thank you to both Trudy and Stacey for sharing their insights and all of their knowledge, plus to all of our attendees for coming along and those that have posed questions. Thank you so much for sparking a really lively and diverse conversation. It's been brilliant. As I've said, the webinar has been recorded and will be shared with you later on, and no doubt it will be posted on the LiftShare YouTube channel as well. So thank you everybody, and goodbye.